In this video, we'll be discussing how the zero product property works and how it will be able to help us solve quadratic equations. So at this point in your math careers, you should be familiar with the number zero and how it works in mathematics with different numbers. Here I want to have a conversation about what happens when we multiply a, which is any number, by 0. So here we have a times 0. And what you should know about 0 is that 0 times any number will produce 0. You should know this about 0, that anything times 0 is 0. So what we can do is we can use this in reverse using the zero product property. So say we had a times b, and we know that a times b is equal to 0. What's going on here is we have two numbers that when multiplied equal 0. Well, the only way that that happens is if a equals 0, so we have 0 times b is equal to 0, or b equals 0, so we have a times 0 is equal to 0. So one of those terms must be equal to 0. So what we can say here is if we have a times b and it's equal to 0, then a equals 0, and or, depending on their values, b equals 0. So if we know that two things when multiplied equals 0, one or both of them must equal 0 in order for that equation to stay true. So now let's apply this zero product property to help us solve some equations. So if you look at each of these, when we apply the zero product property, what we're looking for is a product. So remember, product means multiplication. So we're looking for two things being multiplied that equals 0. And if we look closely here, what we'll notice is we have x plus 7. The parentheses smushed together means multiplication of x minus 1 is equal to 0. So we have two things being multiplied that equal 0. That is the zero product property. So what we can do here is we can say, well, for this equation to be true, either this first piece here, this x plus 7, needs to equal 0, or this second piece here, x minus 1, needs to equal 0. So when we have something times something equals 0, that product of 0 tells us that one of these two items needs to equal 0 in order for our equation to be true. So what we can do here is we set both equal to 0 and we solve. So we find that x equals negative 7 is one option for x, because this would become negative 7 plus 7, which would become 0, and anything times 0 is 0. And then our other option here is to add 1 to each side, so we have x is equal to 1. And what that would do is that would make this parenthesis piece right here equal 0. So we would have something times 0 equals 0. So x equals negative 7 and x equals 1 are both values for x that if you put them back in the original equation would make it true. Now if we look at the second example here, we also notice that we have a product. So we have 2x, everything smushed together is a multiplication. So I have 2x times x minus 4, and that's equal to 0. So notice we have a product in multiplication, and it's equal to 0. So again, we can apply the zero product property here and say, well, either the 2x is going to equal 0, or the x minus 4 is going to equal 0, and that's going to result in our product of 0. So if we divide by 2 here, we find that one option is that x is equal to 0, or the other option is that x is equal to 4. So we have two options here that if we were to take these two options and put them back into the original equation, they would make the equation true. And again, we can do all of these steps because of the zero product property.